1. My family has owned the house since forever, over 100 years actually. It's in a small village. I'd call it a town, but it's too small to be considered one, with not much around except for a few pizza places, an elementary school, and a Dollar General. Before I was born, my parents were renting the house from my grandparents, who had inherited it from my great-grandparents on my grandpa's side. They were wonderful people, or that's what I've been told. I never met them. I don't doubt it, though. I trust my family in that sense. Anyways, my parents were living there, and then they had me. My mom had a hard time getting pregnant, had a miscarriage, and had a hard time during labor. It took 24 hours for me to be delivered, and it was an emergency C-section. I was a fat baby. Like real fat. I was what you consider a normal baby girl. Well, kind of. Upstairs, my parents had a room, and then a door that led right into my nursery. It was really nice back then. It wasn't falling apart. Anyways, my dad told me a story about when he was cleaning out the attic that is in the closet of my old nursery. He told me how he was half into the attic, his torso, arm, and head in the attic, while his legs were steady on the ladder in the closet. No one was home. My mom had taken me to my grandparents' house that was not even 5 minutes away in the same village. He said he heard footsteps, thinking someone had gotten in. He checked the whole house, and nothing. And about me being a weird baby? Well, my mom told me stories growing up about how when I was a baby I would stare at the top corner of the room and giggle. When I learned how to talk, my family would take me up to the cemetery, and I would talk randomly to myself in front of my great-grandparents' grave. Well, when I was 4, my brother was born, and we moved to my grandparents' basement because both of my parents now worked, and it would be easier for my grandparents to care for me and my brother. For being a basement, nothing ever happened, except for it flooding every spring. God, that sucked. My parents finally got fed up with the basement flooding, and we moved back to our old house. I was in kindergarten. My brother, old enough to sleep in his own little bed. His room was in my old nursery, and no matter what my parents did, he would not sleep in there. He slept in my parents' bed every single night, and so did I. It wasn't because I was scared or anything. Nothing paranormal had happened to me yet. I had really bad knee pain, and every night I would go into my parents' room and my mom would rub my knees till the meds kicked in. That was until my cousin came over for the first time. She never went over to anyone's house. She had a hard time leaving her dad and didn't grow out of it for the longest time. But she finally agreed to sleeping over. We stayed up all night, playing dolls and house, until we heard shuffling in the kitchen, and the air smelled of cookies. We assumed my mom was making a nice snack for us because she was extra-like. So we made our way down the stairs. It was dark in the living room, the only light coming from the stairwell. We walked to the kitchen. The light was on, but no one was inside, and the cookie smell was slowly disappearing. Freaked out, we go to my mom's room and peek in to see if anyone was awake, but everyone was sound asleep. She refuses to stay all night at that house to this day. She says a lot more happened there. Said that night the TV turned on to static in the living room, and that when we came back to the room our dolls were in the closet. But I think it's her memory trying to make something scarier than it was back then, after all. I don't remember that at all, and I usually remember that kind of thing. Now that I think about it now, I remember my parents and grandparents talking about how my great-grandparents were amazing cooks and bakers, and that my great-grams made amazing homemade cookies and ice cream. Anyway, time moved on, and I can't remember ever experiencing anything else during that part of my life in that house. We eventually moved out when I was in the 4th grade, into a run-down home that my parents remodeled for a year. I still live there today. My grandparents rented that house out when we moved. A weird family moved in, and when they moved out, my grandparents moved in. The house was an odd shape after the renters moved. My room was the worst. They had painted my hot pink walls white, with one coat so the pink showed through, and they had painted the door pink and half of the window blue. Only half of it. All the doors except for mine were replaced, but they were turned upside down so that the handle is at your chest. Truly bizarre. And the ceiling has some of the worst water damage ever seen. But the ceiling was pretty bad when we lived there. It just got worse. My grandparents worked hard and long on remodeling it, and it is somewhat better, except for the ceiling upstairs. They tried. My parents set up a bed for me to sleep in whenever I came over to stay the night in my old bedroom, and it's really nice. But here's the thing. Everyone else refuses to sleep there. I am the only one that agrees to sleeping up there. My grandparents would. They ain't afraid of no ghosts. But both of them having bad back problems, they have to have a room downstairs. They set up a room for my brother up there in his old room, painted his favorite color, and said they would move the Xbox downstairs upstairs so he can have his own private space. He will not sleep up there. My 12-year-old brother would rather sleep in my grandparents' bed than sleep upstairs. My cousins from Texas, Kentucky, Tennessee, all of them refuse to sleep up there whenever they come over to stay. They would rather sleep on the old couch than sleep upstairs in a bed. I think it's a bit irrational. Anyways, I'm now 16 and I go over to their house every other weekend to visit. I love my room upstairs. It's got a queen bed, a vanity, and a TV, and it's literally the most calming part of the house. But I've recently started to experience more things this past year. It started when I was laying in bed on my phone reading some story. When I hear footsteps, I think it's my grandma, since she comes up to check and say night sometimes. I wait a few minutes, but she doesn't come in, so I go to check the hallway. I always leave the hallway light on just in case I need to use the restroom at night. It's downstairs. But when I looked, no one was there. I was confused and go down the stairs and to the kitchen where my grandma was. I asked her if she was upstairs just a few minutes ago, and she says no. I go back upstairs and sleep normally and forget it. Fast forward a few weeks, and I'm upstairs once again reading on my phone in bed at night. I hear footsteps, and then tapping on my door. Knowing my grandma knocks before she comes in, I say come in and wait for her to come in and say goodnight. But she doesn't. I get up and check the hallway, and there is once again nothing. I go downstairs and ask my grandma if she came up to my room. She says no again. Fast forward another few weeks. I lay with my back to the door trying to go to sleep when I hear an old woman laugh. God, my heart nearly seized. I was so shocked. It was completely silent throughout the rest of the house. It was 1 a.m. I turn towards my door and no one is there. This has by far been the freakiest experience I've ever faced, and it spooked me enough to hurriedly turn on my light and just sit there for a bit. I eventually turned on my nightlight, turned off my lights, and went back to sleep, but boy was that hard. Fast forward another few weeks, 2 weeks ago from now, and I was once again laying in my bed, this time watching some paranormal show on the Travel Channel, when my eyes dropped to the bottom of my bed to my right. I thought I saw a shadow moving around on the floor. I shot up and looked at that spot till I got up and turned the lights on. I'm pretty sure it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, but it was one of the scariest moments of my life. Up until the last encounter, that was probably not real. I wasn't really scared. A few shocked moments that kind of freaked me out, but not scared. I honestly just think it's my great-grandparents coming around to make sure I'm okay upstairs, all by myself. So yeah, my grandparents' house is pretty weird. 2. Okay, so I will try to explain this story as best I can, leaving out no detail, and definitely not fabricating anything. Basically, it's short and far behind me, but it undoubtedly happened. I was young, maybe 4 or 5 years old. My parents had dropped me off at my aunt's house for the weekend while they went to scout out houses in Florida. I was living in Pittsburgh at the time, and lived in a trailer home, while my aunt lived in a mansion, a very large house to me at the time. Basically, the story goes like this. It was the middle of the day, and I had lost one of my Lego pieces in some portion of the house. I knew it had to be on the 3rd floor. FYI, this house was extra creepy to me at the time, and being alone was not an option. I went to the 3rd floor with my cousin, and we searched the whole floor except one room, which was my aunt's master bedroom. This room had 2 doors leading into it, a double set of doors, and a walk-through closet. The double set of doors were locked, and I was too small to even open them anyway, so I searched through the closet with my cousin. Then, out of nowhere, she gave up on me and left. But I kept looking. So I went into the empty master bedroom by myself, to search under the bed before I called it quits too. Keep in mind that there was plenty of sunshine, but it didn't matter. As I remember it clear as day, I turned to run from looking under the king-sized bed, and was presented with the figure of death. Everything was normal except for this figure. This figure stood next to the locked double doors and wasn't even blocking my exit, but was ominously there nonetheless. This grim reaper figure stood maybe 6 feet tall, had a pristine black-handed scythe with a glimmering silver blade. The figure was maybe 2 feet behind me, simply glaring in my direction. This figure felt as if it had a presence and was very much three-dimensional, not like that of an hallucination. Most astonishingly, it was completely motionless. This struck nothing but terror in my heart, and I ran out through the closet screaming. I didn't go back into that room alone for a while. I was, and still am, completely healthy. I haven't had and still don't have any diseases or mental disorders, and this was completely a one-time occurrence, one that I never forgot. And even after it happened, I still remember telling all of my friends and family. Family didn't care, and friends just chimed in with similar stories saying it was cool. This was right before I moved to Florida. I've lived there for the past 12 years, doing just fine. Any ideas on what it could mean? 3. Just to let people know ahead of time, this didn't happen recently, but instead happened roughly a year and a half ago. For a bit of quick background, I am a 22-year-old male, was 20 at the time, going through my sophomore year of college. I had lived in the same house my entire life, but to be honest, it wasn't in the best shape, or the most well-kept either. Thus my parents decided to buy a new house while I was still living away at college. We had bought the house from the daughter of the man who had lived there before he passed away in the master bedroom, from what I think was a heart attack. Though we had bought it in roughly early February, we wouldn't start moving in until it was warmer around mid-April. Now for the main part of the story. I had come up with the idea of having roughly 6 of my friends over in this newly acquired house for my birthday in March. There was no furniture in the house, so I had to find and put in a table and chairs for us to all hang out, play cards, board games, etc. FYI, I'm a bit of a nerd. I have always been fascinated by the paranormal ever since I was a preteen, but I would never call myself a true believer or a spiritually sensitive. But something was off with the house since the first time I stepped foot inside. Specifically, there is a stairwell that is parallel to the hallway used to enter the house. One can peek over the banister of the hallway and see all the steps leading up to the basement level of the house. For some unknown reason, these steps always make people uncomfortable. Oftentimes, either myself, my family, or even those that come into our house often experience lightheadedness and vertigo going down those stairs. Fast forward to the night of the party, everything was going great. I needed to charge my phone, so I plugged my phone into the bathroom that sits directly next to the hallway entrance, and has a great view from the stairwell of the bathroom door. As everyone is leaving at roughly 2 a.m., we all get into our cars and make our way to our respective houses. Since we hadn't moved into this new house yet, we were all asleep in the old one. Roughly halfway to my old house, I realized I had left my charger at the new house, and needed to head back for it because I didn't want my phone to be dead for my shift at work that afternoon. I had a strange feeling as I was heading for the house, that I wasn't going to like going back into that house, but I needed my phone charger, and that was the end of that. So I enter the house and quickly swing into the bathroom to grab my charger, when I start to hear something. I peek my head out of the doorway to the bathroom, and begin to realize what I was hearing. Someone was walking up my steps. Not only that, but it also sounded like someone was taking their hand and rubbing it across the plaster wall as they were coming up. It was after a few seconds that my body just said go, and I booked it out of the house and drove away without locking it back up. I went to sleep shaken up after what had happened, and told my mother about the incident the next morning, to which she replied that she had heard something similar to someone walking around, only to look and find no one else in the house. Needless to say, it took several months before I was able to walk down to be around those stairs, and even to this day weird things happen around the house from time to time, without explanation. 4. The first time my dream began, in a kind of fair with little kids playing and running everywhere, it was pretty calm and assuring. Until a kid almost died because some other kids made him swallow batteries and somehow something guided me to this kid to save him. Once the kid was all good and safe, all I remember is being under a magnificent tree, and a little kid, not older than maybe like 7 or 8 years old, turned to me and said to me, "Thank you. I can go now," or something along those lines. And like that, he was surrounded by a warm light. You could feel it from where I was standing, all the peace and love in a matter of seconds, and the kid just faded away. I can't begin to explain how much it made me cry from happiness, from this feeling of peace and appeasement. It was truly beautiful and intense. And then I started to head home. I was in the parking lot that was just a field that became muddy, when a 10-year-old kid who was passing by me bumped into my shoulder and turned back at me. His face, well, where his face was supposed to be was just black with blurry features, but I could still see him smiling at me, and his red, glowing eyes. Him staring at me like that made me feel so much in danger, like I could feel that he wanted to do something bad to me. After that, I immediately woke up crying and ran to my mom to explain to her what had just happened. I was crying because that feeling of happiness, peace, and appeasement was still running throughout my whole body, and then I remembered the black figure. It was so weird how the beginning of my dream was filled with happiness and peace, and the end with darkness and the will to do horrible things. And here's why I decided to write this. A couple of nights ago, I dreamed that I was in my bed, looking in my dressing, a very small room, and this tall black figure with no features whatsoever was staring at me, squatting with one hand on the ground like he was trying to stabilize himself. He was staring at me with those same red glowing eyes, like he was trying to see how I would react to him, or what he was trying to make me see. Beside him was something moving, but I couldn't pay attention because the black, tall shadow was so intriguing to me that I couldn't take my eyes off of him. I didn't feel any fear, just that I wanted to know what it was. I knew it wasn't something with good intention, but maybe it's because I'm so used to seeing stuff like that I'm just like, come take me, who cares? I don't. You want to hurt me? Go ahead, I can't do anything about it, so if someone knows what it could be, I'm curious if someone else experienced something like that, or if you could possibly know what it was. Thanks for listening. 5. Some of this information I got from my mom, as I was too young to remember all of it. From the moment I started speaking, I would tell my parents about Dodd. I was obsessed with him. I would tell everyone about him, I would talk to him, I'd play with him. My parents assumed it was just an imaginary friend. Lots of kids have them, and considering I'm the youngest of 4 boys, they guessed that my brothers didn't want to hang out with a little kid, so I made my own friend. It began to escalate when my mom would find me, 2 or 3 years old, sitting alone in my room, having conversations with thin air, or responding as if someone had said something, nodding, listening, laughing as if he told a joke. I treated Dodd like he was a real person, and I really, genuinely believed he was. Part of me still does. I would demand Dodd have his own seat, and his own plate of food every single day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Any time we left the house, I'd scream and cry if they forgot Dodd in the house. He had to have his own seat. He ended up having an entire toddler's car seat because I was so scared of him getting hurt. And he had to be picked up, set in his seat, and buckled in just like they did to me. My parents had to talk to Dodd the way they talked to me, or I'd get upset that they're ignoring him. I have memories of Dodd, genuinely seeing Dodd with my own eyes. I'd swear on my life that he was really there to this day. He was about a foot or so tall, the size of a small child like I was, but he was a pure white, mostly featureless bipedal bear. He had no face. He had an outward bump where a muzzle would be, and 2 indents where he should have had eyes. He didn't wear clothes, and he didn't have real paws or hands. He almost looked like a gummy bear with round, tapered hands and feet, and no details whatsoever. But he was solid white and not transparent. He didn't speak verbally, it was more like I just knew what he was saying. I also don't remember him walking anywhere or moving at all, really. But I'd look away and look back and he'd be in a different place. I'd swear on my life, on everything I know, that he in some sense was real. I don't know how old I was exactly. I'd guess around 4 or 5. I went outside with Dodd because he wanted to show me something. He led me around the back of the house to a square panel of sorts that I had never seen before. It was like a tiny door held with a simple hook latch. I opened it, and inside was a concrete floor, a really low ceiling, and a dusty old red tricycle. The classic little one you're probably imagining. It was full of cobwebs, and I couldn't see anything other than a tiny bit of the concrete and the tricycle, because the sun was adjacent from where I was. I climbed in the little cubbyhole and just sat there with my knees to my chest, and I can still vividly remember seeing Dodd standing just outside the door to it, facing me. I didn't know this spot existed. I had no reason to. Who tells their toddler about a spooky concrete hole in the back of the house that's only accessed from the outside? Recently, I told my parents about that memory a few months ago, and they said they purposely didn't tell me or my brothers about it because if you go inside that area, about 2 feet in, the concrete drops off down to the open pipes, wires, and insulation, and since there's no access from the inside, it'd be really hard to find us if one of us fell in. I didn't forget about Dodd for a single day for 6 years. I never let one of his meals go by. I never ignored him a whole day. I never let us go on a car ride without him for 6 years. But eventually, we had to move houses. I'd lived in the same house this whole time, and it was the final day we'd ever be at that house, and we were getting into the car to go to the new house. My mom picked me up and put me in the car, and then turned to pick up Dodd and bring him too. When she did, I immediately started crying and angrily said, "Dodd's not coming!" I apparently stopped talking about Dodd altogether that day. And for years I'd get extremely upset and angry if someone mentioned him around me. My mom told me she researched the house we lived in, and there was a little boy years before us that had died when a gas pipe burst directly in his face. And as scary and weirdly fitting for my faceless friend as that sounds, I don't know if I buy into it personally. I was never afraid of Dodd, and I don't think of him as scary now. I think it's extremely strange, obviously, especially considering that he appeared as a featureless bear and he stuck with me for 6 years. Much longer than most imaginary friends. I think it's mind-boggling that he brought me to a place in the house I had never been in, and that the knowledge of it was deliberately kept from me. Sure, it could absolutely be some absurd psychological thing, or it could be some strange kind of ghost or spirit. But either way, I believe in and still think kindly of Odd, and no matter what he is, I'm grateful to have had a strange childhood friend. Update. I went to my mom to ask her some of the questions people had, so I made sure I don't spread the wrong info. She just told me about the faceless boy she researched. His name was David Dodd, and he was holding a teddy bear in the newspaper photo of him. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, episode 182. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. I also have a little bit of a shout out to give. Got this saved. I will also drop it in the description. Snapchat of the author of the story with the Reaper is I_Christoph7415. I will drop that in the description next to the story as well. Okay, I'd also like to say thank you very much to all the lovely feedback you gave me on the recent short story I wrote that I uploaded to the channel. Not the first thing I've ever written, but the first thing I've ever actually written in recent years and actually completed. It's meant a lot to me. There was some stuff in there that's personal, other stuff is complete fabrication. The bit about my parents, that was real. Those were real events, and it just felt appropriate. Write what you know, write from experience. And it helped. Okay, and with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.